Massive stone walls still stand after thousands of years, defying time itself. How did ancient builders achieve these engineering marvels without any of our modern tools? We are about to unlock 35 of their most closely guarded secrets. You will discover the brilliant minds and mysterious methods behind the world's most legendary fortresses. How did they create concrete that heals its own cracks? What was the purpose of fusing fortress walls into glass? We will uncover the lost sciences and hidden strategies sealed within the stone. What do you believe is the greatest mystery left behind by these master builders? The very ground beneath a fortress was its first and greatest defense. Long before a single stone was laid, ancient builders engaged in a high-stakes game of strategic placement, choosing locations that turned nature itself into a weapon. They were not merely constructing walls, they were sculpting the landscape into an impenetrable stronghold. This art of placement reveals a profound understanding of geography, one that provided both undeniable military advantages and a powerful psychological edge. A fortress positioned correctly did not just deter attack, it declared dominance. Consider the incredible site of Masada in Israel. It was not built on a simple hill, but on an isolated, sheer-sided rock plateau rising dramatically from the Judean desert. This location was a masterstroke. Any approaching army would be exposed to the harsh desert sun for days, their every movement visible from the heights above. By the time they reached the base, they were exhausted and demoralized, forced to look up at an unassailable fortress. The builders of Masada used the environment to drain an enemy's will long before the first arrow was ever fired. This principle extended far beyond sheer cliffs. The placement of fortresses near reliable water sources was a matter of survival, allowing a garrison to withstand a siege for months or even years. Controlling a lone spring in a barren region made a fortress the key to life itself. Similarly, building along crucial trade routes gave these strongholds immense economic power. They could monitor and tax the flow of goods, wealth, and information, making them not just military installations but centers of control that shaped entire civilizations. The true secret was understanding that the perfect location was a multiplier of strength, making a fortress far greater than the sum of its stone walls. But the selection of a fortress site often went far beyond physical strategy. For many ancient builders, the earth itself was alive with invisible currents of energy. They practiced the art of geomancy, a profound belief that structures must be aligned with these spiritual and natural forces to ensure their power and longevity. This was not mere superstition. It was a sophisticated system of environmental integration, where a fortress needed to be spiritually harmonized with its surroundings to be truly complete. From the master planners of China's Forbidden City to the Celtic Druids of Europe, this sacred science guided the placement of walls and gates. They sought out ley lines, hypothetical alignments said to crisscross the landscape with concentrated energy, building their strongholds at the powerful intersections. The foundations of many ancient fortresses were laid according to these unseen maps, connecting them to a network of power that we are only beginning to understand today. Astronomical alignments were another critical layer. A gate might be positioned to face the rising sun on the solstice, bathing the entrance in light on the most sacred day of the year. This did more than mark the calendar. It tied the fortress to the eternal cycles of the cosmos, making it a part of something much larger than itself. The builders were weaving their creation into the very fabric of the universe. This practice is stunningly visible in the layout of Beijing's Forbidden City. Its immense defensive walls, gates, and primary halls are meticulously aligned on a north-south axis, reflecting a cosmic order and harmony between heaven and earth. Every measurement, every angle was calculated using sacred geometry, employing ratios and shapes believed to be divinely inspired. The result was a fortress palace that was not only militarily formidable but also a perfect spiritual vessel, designed to channel beneficial energies and ensure the stability of the empire it protected. The stone was strong because the placement was sacred. That sacred geometry and spiritual alignment would mean nothing if the walls themselves crumbled. The true strength of these ancient fortresses lies in the very stuff that binds them, a material so advanced that we are still struggling to replicate it today. This is the lost science of mortar. Forget the simple lime and sand mixtures you might expect. The mortar used in the world's most enduring structures is a chemical puzzle that has baffled modern scientists for generations. The Romans, in particular, were masters of this alchemy. They developed a concrete so revolutionary that it did not weaken in seawater, it actually grew stronger. Imagine a breakwater protecting a coastal fortress pounded by saltwater waves for 2,000 years. While our modern concrete would degrade and crack in decades, Roman concrete undergoes a miraculous transformation. When seawater seeps into its microscopic cracks, it reacts with a special volcanic ash the Romans used, creating new, interlocking crystals that literally fill the gaps. The concrete heals itself. This was no accident. Roman engineers specifically formulated this mix for their harbors and sea forts, creating marine structures that have survived millennia of punishment where our own best efforts fail. This secret was not confined to Rome. On the other side of the world, Chinese builders achieved a similar legendary durability by mixing their mortar with an unexpected ingredient, sticky rice. This simple, everyday food was boiled and added to a standard lime mortar, creating a composite material with incredible strength and water resistance. The long carbohydrate chains in the rice acted as a natural binder, producing a mortar that was less brittle and far more cohesive. The result, walls that have withstood countless earthquakes and centuries of warfare, their stones still locked firmly together by a breakfast staple. What other organic compounds did ancient builders discover? Some analyses of mortar from sites in the Americas and ancient Mesopotamia suggest the use of tree sap, animal blood, or even fermented fruit extract. These organic additives could have altered the mortar's chemical properties, potentially giving it a slight flexibility to absorb seismic shocks or creating a waterproof seal that repelled the elements. Each culture, it seems, developed its own proprietary blend, a recipe passed down from master to apprentice, guarding the secret to building for eternity. The mortar was not just glue, it was the lifeblood of the fortress, a technological innovation that allowed these stone giants to breathe, flex, and endure through the ages. That self-healing mortar sealed the stones, but a fortress could still fall if its defenders died of thirst. The true test of any stronghold was not just its walls, but its ability to sustain life under siege, and ancient engineers solved this with breathtaking ingenuity. Their mastery of hydraulics created hidden lifelines that turned barren rock into a place of enduring refuge. Deep within the Rock of Gibraltar, a labyrinth of secret cisterns was painstakingly carved directly into the limestone bedrock. These were not simple wells, but massive, cathedral-like chambers designed to collect and store every drop of rainwater that fell on the rock. The entire fortress was in effect a giant water catchment system, with channels and drains carved into the stone to funnel precipitation into these hidden reservoirs. An attacking army would see a dry, imposing rock, completely unaware that within its heart lay a guaranteed water supply that could sustain a garrison for over a year. This genius for concealment extended far beyond the fortress walls themselves. In Persia, engineers developed the Qanat, a revolutionary system for tapping distant groundwater without a single pump. They would dig a vertical shaft down to the water table at the base of a mountain. Then, working entirely underground, they would tunnel backwards at a gentle slope for miles all the way to their destination. A series of vertical access shafts, cleverly disguised from the surface, provided air and allowed for the removal of excavated material. The result was a continuous, gravity-fed stream of fresh water flowing silently through the desert, emerging exactly where it was needed inside a fortress or city. An enemy camped outside would have no idea this subterranean river even existed, making a siege an exercise in futility. The Romans, of course, perfected the above-ground version with their iconic aqueducts. But even these marvels were often protected by military strategy. Aqueducts serving frontier fortresses were frequently built underground for long stretches to prevent an enemy from easily cutting the water supply. Where they had to cross a valley, the soaring arcades we picture today were sometimes fortified with guard towers and defensive walls, turning a piece of civic infrastructure into a defensible corridor. The secret was redundancy and secrecy, a multi-layered approach to water security. A fortress might have its deep cisterns, a hidden canal, and a protected aqueduct all operating at once. This ensured that even if one system was discovered and compromised, others would remain. The water itself became a silent, invisible defender, the most crucial soldier in the garrison. It was the difference between a community that could wait out any threat and one that would be forced to surrender in a matter of days. Silent stone could speak, and ancient builders learned to listen. Beyond the physical walls and hidden water sources, some fortresses were engineered as colossal acoustic instruments, turning the very air into a sentry. This was an invisible layer of defense, a form of ancient sonar built directly into the architecture. Builders manipulated curves, angles, and materials to control sound in ways that seem almost impossible. They created whispering galleries where a murmur at one end could be heard with perfect clarity at the other, allowing secret communications between guards that could not be intercepted. They designed long, vaulted corridors that amplified the faintest scuff of a boot or the jingle of armor, giving defenders precious minutes of warning before an intruder was even visible. The goal was to make the fortress itself a living, listening entity. The principle is stunningly demonstrated at Golconda Fort in India. At its main entrance gate, a single handclap does not just echo, it travels. The sound is carried with uncanny clarity all the way to the highest point of the fortress complex, a dizzying distance of over 1 kilometer away. This was no architectural fluke. It was a meticulously designed early warning system. Sentries stationed at the summit could identify specific signals from below, distinguishing between the normal sounds of the bustling citadel and the telltale clamor of a potential attack at the gates. The builders achieved this by aligning hard, reflective stone surfaces in a perfect path, creating an acoustic corridor that channeled sound waves upward without significant loss. An enemy massing at the gate would unknowingly announce their presence to the entire fortress. This acoustic intelligence was not limited to grand gestures. The same principles were applied on a smaller, more intimate scale to protect royalty and state secrets. In many castles and palaces, secret chambers were constructed adjacent to throne rooms or meeting halls. These rooms featured narrow, trumpet-shaped openings in the walls, often disguised as decorative vents or part of the stonework. A spy or guard hidden within could press their ear to the opening and hear every word spoken in the main chamber with perfect fidelity, as the stone funnel captured and concentrated the sound waves. It was the ultimate eavesdropping device built directly into the fabric of the building. This manipulation of sound reveals a sophistication that goes far beyond brute force. It shows a civilization that understood physics on an intuitive level, harnessing the properties of waves and materials to create a defensive network that was both silent and all-hearing. What other secrets might be hidden in the echoes of these ancient stones? The same stones that whispered secrets could also lock together in a silent, seamless embrace. Scattered across the globe are walls built from a puzzle of polygonal masonry, where colossal, irregularly shaped blocks fit together with a precision that seems to defy the very tools of the era. At sites like Sacsayhuaman in Peru, these zigzagging walls are composed of stones weighing hundreds of tons, each one a unique, interlocking piece. The joints are so impossibly tight that you cannot force a razor blade or even a single piece of paper between them. This was not just about creating a strong wall, it was about achieving a perfect monolithic unity that could withstand the immense and constant threat of earthquakes. The conventional explanation points to an almost unimaginable level of patience and skill. The theory of trial and error suggests that builders would painstakingly chip away at a stone, then hoist it into place to check the fit, lower it, carve a little more, and repeat the process dozens, perhaps hundreds of times for a single block. This method, while plausible, feels inadequate when you stand before the sheer scale and complexity of these structures. The time and labor involved would have been astronomical, and the risk of shattering a nearly finished block was ever present. This has led to more extraordinary theories, ideas that sound like they belong in science fiction. One persistent legend speaks of a lost plant-based liquid, a juice that could temporarily soften granite and andesite, allowing workers to mold the rock like clay before it hardened back into its original diamond-like strength. Another, even more fantastical idea proposes the use of sonic levitation, where powerful, focused sound waves were used to cancel gravity itself, making the massive stones weightless and easy to position with perfect accuracy. While there is no concrete evidence for these methods, their endurance speaks to the profound mystery these walls represent. Perhaps the truth lies in a combination of approaches. The builders might have used finely tuned percussion instruments, tapping specific points on the stone to find its natural fracture lines, much like a master sculptor finding the form within the marble. They could have employed abrasive sands and water with drills or saws to achieve those glassy, smooth surfaces. What is undeniable is the result, a construction technique so advanced that these walls have shrugged off centuries of seismic activity that would reduce any modern building to rubble. The irregular, jigsaw-like pattern itself is the key to their seismic resilience, allowing the entire structure to flex and shift during an earthquake before settling back into its original, immovable position. The puzzle of polygonal masonry remains one of the most visually stunning and intellectually humbling secrets of the ancient world, a silent challenge from the past that we have yet to fully answer. These seamless stone walls also manipulated the mind as effectively as they blocked physical force. Ancient builders were masters of psychological warfare, weaving defensive optical illusions directly into their architecture to shatter an enemy's confidence before a single drop of blood was spilled. They understood that a fortress was not just a physical barrier, but a weapon that targeted perception itself. Consider the humble gateway, the most vulnerable point in any wall. Rather than a simple, open arch, builders crafted entrances using forced perspective. The gate would be built with converging lines, its inner walls and ceiling angled inward. From an attacker's viewpoint outside, this made the passage appear significantly shorter and narrower than it truly was, suggesting it was a death trap easily covered by defending archers. The psychological effect was immediate, funneling an advancing force into a perceived choke point that amplified their fear and claustrophobia. This manipulation of sight was combined with a brutal manipulation of movement. The approach to a fortress gate was rarely a straight, open path. Instead, attackers were forced to navigate a zigzagging ramp, a design known as a switchback. This serpentine approach served multiple devastating purposes. It completely neutralized the terrifying power of a cavalry charge, as horses could not build up speed on sharp turns. More insidiously, it forced every soldier to expose their unshielded right side to the defenders on the walls above for a prolonged period. Marching in a slow, predictable, and exposed line, they became target practice, their advance measured in casualties. But the most imposing illusion of all was the wall itself. Many fortifications were built with a pronounced outward slope, a feature called a batter. This was not merely for structural stability. When viewed from below by an attacking army, the batter created a powerful optical effect, making the walls appear to loom overhead, impossibly tall and steep. A ladder that seemed long enough at a distance would fall tragically short against this sloping face. The psychological message was clear and crushing: you cannot climb this, you cannot win. These architectural tricks formed a layered assault on the senses, turning a straightforward assault into a disorienting nightmare of false distances, exposed flanks, and overwhelming scale. The goal was to make the fortress itself feel alive and hostile, a giant that watched and toyed with its victims. How many armies looked upon these clever deceptions and simply lost the will to fight? These psychological deceptions funneled attackers into the most lethal zones of all. Above the very gateways where forced perspective created a sense of dread, ancient builders embedded one of the most brutally efficient defensive features ever conceived: the murder hole. Known in medieval Europe as mortars, these were far more than simple openings in a ceiling. They were the heart of a chillingly sophisticated kill box, engineered to maximize carnage from a position of absolute safety. The strategic placement was everything. Murder holes were concentrated over the main gate passage and any other narrow corridors where invading forces would be forced to bunch together, their numbers becoming their greatest weakness. In that cramped, shadowy space, soldiers would look up to see a grid of dark slots in the stone above them, a final, terrifying sight. From these openings, defenders unleashed a horrifying arsenal. Rocks and heavy weights were just the beginning. The true genius lay in the liquids. Cauldrons of boiling water, while scalding, were often a secondary choice as water cools rapidly. Boiling oil was a legendary and feared weapon, clinging to skin and armor, causing unimaginable burns. But perhaps the most insidious substance was hot sand. It was cheap, readily available, and utterly devastating. When poured from a height, the fine, heated grains would pour through the gaps in plate armor and chainmail, searing the skin underneath and rendering a soldier completely incapacitated as he frantically tried to remove his own scorching gear. Then there was quicklime, a caustic powder that would react violently with moisture, blinding soldiers and choking them with toxic dust, or burning tar, which would stick and continue to burn, turning a man into a living torch. The engineering to support this gruesome task was remarkably advanced. Special draining systems were built into the floor of the murder hole chamber itself. After pouring one cauldron, any residual liquid would drain away through small channels, allowing defenders to immediately pour the next substance without slipping on their own mess. Protective slots in the side walls of the murder hole platform allowed archers to cover the area below, picking off any invaders who managed to avoid the initial deluge. This created a seamless, multi-layered attack, a storm of death from above and arrows from the side, all raining down into a space with no escape. The murder hole was not just a weapon, it was a statement of total control, transforming the fortress entrance from a point of weakness into an inescapable grave. While murder holes sealed the fate of those trapped above, an even more desperate struggle unfolded in the darkness below. Fortresses were not just defended from their walls, but from a secret, subterranean world of tunnels. These underground passages served two critical purposes: escape and counterattack. The most famous example is the hidden escape route at Masada. After the Romans built a massive siege ramp to breach the fortress walls, the Jewish defenders used a pre-dug tunnel to slip out, a final, defiant act to deny their conquerors a complete victory. These escape tunnels were lifelines, meticulously excavated in secret and known only to a trusted few, offering a way to evacuate key personnel or launch surprise raids against an unsuspecting enemy camp. But the true underground warfare began when the attackers themselves started to dig. A common siege tactic was mining, digging a tunnel underneath a fortress wall to collapse it or create a breach. The defenders' response to this was one of the most terrifying forms of combat in the ancient world: counter-siege tunneling. Defending combat engineers would listen for the sounds of enemy picks, then dig their own tunnel directly towards the threat. When the two tunnels connected, a brutal, close-quarters battle would erupt in a space no wider than a man's shoulders, deep beneath the earth. The air would be thick with dust and the smell of sweat, the darkness broken only by flickering torchlight. Archaeological evidence from sites like Dura Europos in Syria paints a vivid picture of these claustrophobic conflict zones. Excavations have revealed the skeletons of Roman and Sasanian soldiers, still locked in combat in a collapsed tunnel, their armor and weapons telling a silent story of the final, desperate struggle. These ancient combat engineers were armed with more than just swords and spears. They used specialized tools for listening, like bronze ear trumpets pressed against the tunnel floor to amplify the faintest scratch of a digging tool from dozens of feet away. They fought with short stabbing blades ideal for tight quarters, and used smoke pots to fill enemy tunnels with choking fumes. This was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse played out in total darkness, where the prize was the structural integrity of the entire fortress above. How many battles for entire cities were actually won or lost by these unsung heroes fighting in the silent, suffocating earth? Even the most formidable stone walls were believed to need a soul. Beyond the murder holes and seismic-resistant masonry, ancient builders wove a layer of spiritual armor directly into their creations, employing symbolic and magical protections to guard against threats seen and unseen. This was the realm of apotropaic magic, a practice designed to turn away evil. Walk through the gates of a medieval Irish castle, and you might find a strange, startling carving high on the stone, a Sheila na gig. This explicit figure of a woman was not meant to scandalize, but to protect. Her shocking display was believed to paralyze evil spirits with confusion or shame, rendering them powerless to enter. Similarly, in ancient Greek fortifications, the horrifying face of a gorgon with its serpent hair and stony gaze was carved over gateways. The myth was clear: to look upon a gorgon was to be turned to stone. These images served as spiritual sentries, their primary purpose to petrify malignant forces, creating a metaphysical barrier no physical army could breach. But these symbols were only the first line of defense. To truly animate a fortress with a protective spirit, a more profound and often darker ritual was required: the foundation sacrifice. Across the globe, from the windy shores of Scotland to the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, folklore and archaeology attest to a sobering practice. Before a major wall or gate was completed, a special deposit was sealed within its core. Sometimes these were symbolic items like coins or carved amulets, but often the sacrifice was more potent. The bones of a prized animal, a horse or a dog, were interred to transfer the creature's loyalty and strength to the wall. In the most extreme cases, the ultimate offering was made. Human remains, often of an infant or a prominent elder, have been found within the foundations of ancient structures. The brutal logic was that a human spirit, bound to the place by its physical remains, would become a permanent, vengeful guardian. This was not an act of casual cruelty, but a deeply held belief that the strength of a fortress depended on a balance, a life given so that thousands within might live. The wall was not just built, it was born, its stones cemented with intention and sacrifice, making the fortress a living entity in the eyes of its creators. The spiritual guardians of a fortress were believed to watch from beyond, but the living, breathing partners in its construction were a force of nature in their own right. Before the age of steel and diesel, ancient builders forged alliances with the animal kingdom, creating a workforce of astonishing strength and intelligence. The most iconic of these partners was the elephant. In the kingdoms of South and Southeast Asia, these majestic creatures were not merely beasts of burden, they were master craftsmen. An elephant's strength is obvious, capable of hauling logs and stones that would require dozens of men. But the true secret lay in the delicate precision of its trunk. Trainers worked for years to develop a deep, communicative bond with their elephants, teaching them to respond to subtle vocal commands and tactile signals. A skilled elephant could use its sensitive, powerful trunk to carefully nudge a multi-ton stone block into its exact position, adjusting it by mere millimeters with a control no primitive crane could ever match. They could pivot stones on their corners, slide them into tight slots, and set them with a gentle finality that ensured a perfect fit. This was not brute force, it was a sophisticated collaboration, a fusion of human guidance and animal dexterity that raised walls which still stand today. While elephants shaped the stone, other animals provided the security and communication that kept the project safe. Long before formal watch rotations, dogs were the silent, vigilant guardians of construction sites. Their keen senses of smell and hearing made them perfect for detecting intruders under the cover of darkness, and their presence alone was a powerful deterrent to thieves or saboteurs. But perhaps the most ingenious animal collaborators were the pigeons. These birds formed a communication network of incredible speed and reliability, a feathered internet connecting distant fortresses and quarries. A single carrier pigeon with a tiny message capsule tied to its leg could traverse treacherous terrain in a fraction of the time it would take a human runner. They carried updates on material deliveries, warnings of approaching threats, and even architectural plans sketched on tiny scrolls. This real-time intelligence allowed project managers to coordinate logistics across vast distances, ensuring that construction never stalled and that every fortress was part of an interconnected defensive web. This forgotten partnership reveals a profound truth about these ancient projects. They were not triumphs of human will alone, but a symphony of interspecies intelligence. The elephant's brawn and finesse, the dog's unwavering alertness, and the pigeon's unerring navigation were all integrated into a single, seamless operation. It makes you wonder, what other forms of animal ingenuity have we forgotten in our rush toward mechanization? Strength came not only from the spirit of the stones, but from their precise, overlapping embrace. Long before the Romans perfected their iconic rounded arch, ancient engineers from the sun-baked Yucatan to the rocky hills of Greece had unlocked a different, brilliant secret for spanning space, the corbelled arch. This technique did not rely on a single, graceful curve. Instead, builders would create a vault or archway by laying flat stones in horizontal courses, with each layer projecting slightly inward over the one below. It is a method of construction that resembles a stone staircase built from both sides until the steps meet in the middle. The physics behind its strength is a marvel of distributed weight. Each stone in the corbel is cantilevered, meaning it is anchored firmly by the mass of the wall behind it, while its protruding end supports the layer above. The weight of the entire structure is channeled downward and outward through this stepped arrangement, transferring the load into the thick walls on either side. This created a stable, triangular-shaped void that was incredibly resilient. One of the most breathtaking examples is the treasury of Atreus in Mycenae, Greece. This was not a treasury at all, but a colossal royal tomb. Its entrance is a long, open-air corridor that leads to a towering doorway capped by a massive corbelled arch. The lintel stone alone weighs over 100 tons, and above it, the builders stacked the stones in perfect, inward-stepping courses to form a triangular void, relieving the immense weight from the doorway below. But the true wonder lies inside, where the same corbelling technique was used to create a monumental domed chamber, reaching up into a perfect beehive-shaped vault. The real genius of this method was its simplicity and independence. To build a true Roman arch required complex wooden framework, a temporary support structure called centering that had to be built first to hold the stones in place until the keystone was locked in. This consumed vast amounts of timber and required sophisticated carpentry. The corbelled arch needed none of that. The builders could simply stack the stones from the ground up, each new layer stabilizing the one before it, creating immense, enduring spaces using little more than patience, precision, and a profound understanding of gravity. This foundational secret allowed cultures without contact with one another to achieve similar architectural grandeur, raising grand gateways and domed chambers that have stood for millennia, all held aloft by the simple, powerful principle of the stepped stone. These stone calendars locked time itself into their foundations. The walls of a fortress did more than keep enemies out. They framed the heavens, transforming the entire structure into a colossal astronomical instrument. This was the ancient secret of seasonal and astronomical alignment, where architecture served as a bridge between the earthly and the celestial. At places like Maiden Castle in England, the massive, complex earthwork entrances are not randomly oriented. They align precisely with the rising sun on the solstices. On the longest day of the year, the summer solstice, the first rays of dawn would have poured directly through the eastern gateway, illuminating the inner sanctum with a blaze of golden light. This was far more than a beautiful spectacle. It was a powerful public demonstration of the ruler's connection to the cosmic order. By marking the turning points of the year, the fortress became the heartbeat of the community's agricultural and ritual life. It told people exactly when to plant, when to harvest, and when to honor the gods, embedding the rhythm of the cosmos into the daily survival of everyone within its shadow. This knowledge was a form of power as potent as any army. The ability to predict the seasons, to seemingly command the sun itself, legitimized the ruler's authority and bound the people to the fortress not just for protection but for meaning. This celestial choreography was a global phenomenon. In the Americas, the Sun Temple at Machu Picchu features a stone of perfect geometry known as the Intihuatana, often called the hitching post of the sun. During the equinoxes, the sun sits directly atop this pillar, casting no shadow. The Inca believed this ritual stone literally held the sun in place, preventing it from continuing its journey and plunging the world into eternal darkness. The fortress city, perched high in the Andes, was thus an active participant in the stability of the universe, its priests and engineers performing essential maintenance on the cosmic machinery. Even in purely military Roman forts, the principle of cardinal alignment was often observed, with the main streets, the Via Praetoria and Via Decumana, laid out on a strict north-south, east-west grid. This was not just for orderly camp planning, it was a symbolic recreation of Roman order upon the chaotic wilderness, imposing the logic of the empire onto the land and the heavens above it. Every sunrise that flooded a gate, every shadow that vanished from a sacred stone, reinforced the message that this place was in harmony with the fundamental laws of existence. The fortress was a clock, a calendar, and a temple, all fused into one unshakable monument of stone and sky. That celestial alignment made a fortress a landmark, but the greatest strongholds were the ones you could not even find. Ancient builders perfected the art of camouflage, weaving their defenses so seamlessly into the landscape that an approaching army might march right past without a second glance. This was defense by disappearance, an ancient form of stealth technology that relied on deception rather than declaration. The most breathtaking example is the city of Petra, carved by the Nabateans directly into the rose-red cliffs of southern Jordan. Its most famous structure, the treasury, is not a free-standing building at all. Its magnificent facade is sculpted from the living rock of the canyon wall, its columns and statues emerging from the mountain itself. From a distance, the entrance was just another fold in the multi-hued stone, a secret hidden in plain sight. The narrow, winding canyon approach, known as the Sick, acted as a natural cloak, revealing the city's splendors only at the last possible moment. An invader would be funneled into a deadly choke point, completely unaware of the thriving metropolis tucked inside the stone around them. On the other side of the world, in the windswept Scottish Highlands, Iron Age builders achieved a similar feat of invisibility with their brocks. These were tall, circular stone towers, but they were not built to be imposing landmarks. Instead, they were constructed from locally quarried stone their color and texture perfectly matching the surrounding rocky outcrops and hillsides. Their double-skinned walls gave them a tapered, organic shape that from a distance, especially in the misty gloom, was indistinguishable from a natural geological formation. A raiding party searching for a village to plunder might look directly at a broch and see only another hill, allowing the families and livestock sheltered within to remain safe and unseen. This principle of blending extended to the very materials used. Builders would intentionally select stones that matched the color of the local bedrock. A gray granite fortress on a gray granite mountain would have its silhouette broken up, its hard man-made lines softened and confused against the natural backdrop. They might even use stones of slightly different hues in a single wall, creating a dappled, irregular pattern that tricked the eye from a distance. The goal was to make the fortress a part of the environment, a silent watcher that offered no clear target, no obvious weak point to assault. Why build a wall to be seen and admired when you could build one that was simply not there at all? That natural camouflage could hide a fortress, but its first line of defense often grew right out of the soil. Beyond the hidden cisterns and acoustic sentries, ancient builders cultivated a living moat of agony, turning the landscape itself into a toxic ally. This was defensive landscaping at its most insidious, using poisonous and painful plants as a form of organic, sustainable biological warfare. Around the outer perimeters of walls, where the ground was most vulnerable to a massed assault, defenders would deliberately plant dense thickets of the most vicious flora they could find. Imagine trying to push through a tangled wall of stinging nettles, their leaves covered in tiny, needle-like hairs that inject a cocktail of irritating chemicals, causing a burning rash that can last for days. Or thorn apple with its spiny seed pods and hallucinogenic, potentially lethal properties. Perhaps the most chilling was the beautiful but deadly oleander, a shrub prized for its lovely pink and white flowers. Every single part of the oleander is intensely poisonous. A single leaf, if ingested, can kill a man. When these leaves fell into nearby streams or wells, they could contaminate the water supply, silently sickening any enemy soldiers who managed to fill their water skins. This living barrier served multiple brutal purposes. First, it was a massive delay tactic. An army cannot simply march through a dense, thorny thicket. Soldiers would have to slow down to hack their way through, all while exposed to archers on the walls above. Each minute spent struggling in that toxic maze was another minute for defenders to organize, to rain down projectiles, and for morale to plummet. Second, it caused injuries that were more than just painful, they were strategically debilitating. A deep puncture from a thorn could easily become infected in an era before antibiotics. A soldier blinded by sap or convulsing from poison was a drain on his unit's resources, requiring care and slowing down the entire army's advance. This was low-maintenance, self-renewing defense. While a wooden palisade could rot or be burned, these plants would grow back year after year, thicker and more impenetrable each season. They required no guards, no repairs, only the patient, cruel foresight of the builders who planted them. It was a silent, growing sentry that never slept, a reminder that the fortress was not just built of stone, but woven into a web of natural hostility designed to break an enemy's body and spirit long before they ever reached the main gate. A single fortress is a powerful statement, but a network of them is an unbreakable conversation. The true genius of ancient defense often lay not in isolated strongholds, but in interlocking systems that transformed entire regions into cohesive fortresses. These networks operated on a principle of mutual support, where communication was the key to survival. A threat seen by one fort could be relayed across hundreds of miles in a matter of hours, allowing distant garrisons to mobilize and converge on an invader from multiple directions. The most iconic example is, of course, the Great Wall of China. It was far more than a single, long wall. It was an integrated defensive ecosystem. Beacon towers were spaced at regular intervals along its length, each one within clear sight of the next. When a sentry spotted enemy movement, a sophisticated code of smoke signals by day and fire signals by night would leap from tower to tower. The number of smoke columns or the specific arrangement of fires could communicate the size and direction of the attacking force, sending precise intelligence racing across the empire faster than any horse could gallop. This allowed commanders far from the front lines to deploy reinforcements and resources with stunning efficiency, turning a linear barrier into a deep, responsive web of defense. This strategic thinking was a global phenomenon. Along the coast of Roman Britain, a chain of fortresses known as the Saxon shore forts guarded against seaborne raiders from across the North Sea. These forts were not identical copies, they were specialized components of a single system. Some, like Portchester, were massive supply depots and naval bases, while others were lean, hardened garrisons positioned at every major river estuary and natural harbor. A fire beacon lit at one fort would be seen by the next, alerting the entire chain and allowing the Roman fleet to intercept invaders before they could penetrate inland. In the high Andes, the Incas mastered this concept with their system of pucarros. These fortresses were strategically placed on hilltops with commanding views of valleys and passes. They were not meant to be self-sufficient, but to function as the vigilant eyes of the empire. Using a system of mirror flashes from highly polished stone or metal, signals could be bounced across vast distances in the clear mountain air. A message about a rebellion or an invading force could travel from modern-day Ecuador to the heart of Peru in a fraction of the time it would take a relay of runners. This created a nervous system for the empire, a real-time information grid that allowed the Inca to control and protect their sprawling, mountainous territory. The secret was redundancy and speed. If one beacon tower fell or one runner was captured, the message could still get through via an alternate route. This elevated defense from a local event to a coordinated, regional response, proving that the strongest wall was not made of stone, but of shared knowledge and instant communication. Some stone walls were not just built, they were remade by fire. Across the highlands of Scotland and the forests of Central Europe, the ramparts of ancient hill forts bear a bizarre and permanent scar. Their stone walls are not merely blackened by soot, but have been transformed, their granite blocks fused together into a solid, glassy crust. This is the mystery of vitrification, a process that requires temperatures hotter than a blacksmith's forge, and its purpose remains one of archaeology's most heated debates. Was this the catastrophic result of a fortress's final, fiery stand? Imagine a besieging army, unable to breach the walls, decides to burn them. They stack immense quantities of timber against the stone ramparts, creating a pyre that burns for days. The theory suggests that the intense, sustained heat, combined with certain minerals naturally present in the stone, could have triggered a chemical reaction, melting the surface into a crude glass. This act of destruction would have been a last, desperate measure by attackers to permanently neutralize the stronghold, ensuring it could never be used against them again. Yet, this explanation is fraught with problems. Why would an attacker go to such immense effort, gathering a small forest's worth of wood, not to breach the wall but to glaze its surface? And why are the vitrified sections often found in specific, strategic points like gateways, rather than being the result of a random, all-consuming conflagration? This has led to a compelling counter-theory that vitrification was not an act of destruction, but a deliberate act of construction. Could ancient engineers have discovered that by subjecting their stone and timber-laced walls to a controlled burn, they could create a super-hardened monolithic shell? The process would have been incredibly dangerous, a carefully managed ritual fire meant to melt the stone binders and any wooden framework within, welding the entire structure into a single, indestructible mass. This newly solidified surface would have been incredibly resilient, weathering storms and resisting erosion far better than ordinary dry stone walls. It would have made the ramparts impossibly slippery for climbers and far more resistant to battering rams, scientific analysis adds another layer of intrigue. Researchers have found that achieving vitrification requires not just immense heat, but the right chemical recipe in the stone itself. The builders may have intentionally selected stones rich in certain minerals that act as a flux, lowering the melting point, or they might have even daubed the walls with a clay slurry designed to encourage the glass-forming reaction. The very presence of these vitrified forts suggests a lost and perhaps deliberately guarded technological secret. Was it a technique born from observing natural wildfires, then refined through generations of trial and error? The scattered, glassy ruins stand as a silent, smoldering question, a testament to a time when builders may have mastered the dragon's breath to forge their walls in fire. That mastery of fire and stone required a kingdom's wealth to fuel it. Behind every towering wall was a hidden, bustling economy, a machine of men and materials that stretched across entire empires. Building a fortress was one of the most expensive undertakings in the ancient world, a project that demanded not just soldiers and engineers, but a legion of accountants, quartermasters, and logisticians. The sheer scale of resources was staggering. A single fortress might consume more stone than an entire city, quarried from miles away. Feeding an army of thousands of laborers required a constant stream of grain, meat, and wine, transported along guarded supply routes. This was a monumental exercise in organization, a secret economy of construction that turned raw materials into unshakable power. The first and most brutal challenge was moving the mountain itself. Quarrying the stone was only the beginning. The real test of an empire's logistical might was transporting 100-ton blocks across treacherous terrain. The ancient Egyptians left us a clear window into this process. To build the great fortresses that protected their borders, they would load colossal blocks of granite onto massive wooden sleds. Teams of laborers, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, would then pour water onto the sand in front of the sled, creating a slick, muddy path that drastically reduced friction. They could then haul these impossible weights for miles, a slow, grinding procession of human strength guided by the crack of an overseer's whip. The Romans refined this further, building specialized roads and using a system of pulleys and capstans, powered by men or oxen walking in a circle, to inch stones up ramps and into position. The labor force itself was a complex society. It was not just a mass of slaves, but a structured hierarchy of skilled professionals. Blacksmiths were on site to forge and sharpen countless tools. Carpenters built the cranes, sleds, and intricate scaffolding. Engineers calculated slopes and directed the work. Potters produced the thousands of vessels needed to carry water and food. All of these people and their families had to be fed, housed, and paid, creating a temporary city whose sole purpose was to build a permanent one. Funding this colossal enterprise required tapping into the very lifeblood of the state. The wealth to build rarely came from a single treasury, but was siphoned from the empire's relentless expansion. Conquest provided the ultimate windfall. The vast treasures of gold, silver, and precious goods plundered from defeated enemies were often directly funneled into monumental construction projects. A victorious general might use his share of the spoils to fund a new frontier fort, literally building his legacy from the ashes of his foes. For ongoing expenses, empires relied on a sophisticated and often ruthless system of taxation and tribute. In ancient Egypt, every household was expected to provide a certain number of labor days, called corvée labor, to the state each year. This was essentially a tax paid in sweat and muscle. The Roman Empire levied taxes on land, goods, and even individuals, creating a continuous revenue stream that funded not only its legions but also the walls that protected them. Subject nations were forced to send tribute, which could include raw materials like timber and iron, or even shipments of skilled artisans. This system turned the entire empire into a supply chain for its own defense, a self-perpetuating cycle where military dominance funded architectural dominance, which in turn secured the borders that produced more wealth. The fortress was not just a symbol of power, it was power itself, crystallized into stone through the relentless machinery of an ancient economy. While the quarries roared with the sound of men and the clang of hammers, an equally vital hum of activity thrived just beyond the stone. The monumental effort of fortress building relied on a hidden workforce, one history has often left in the shadows: women. They were the indispensable support system, the unseen engine that powered the entire operation. Picture the mountains of earth that needed to be moved to create ramparts or level foundations. That earth was carried away in countless baskets, each one woven by hand, often by women. These were not simple crafts, they were essential tools of industry, designed for strength and durability to withstand constant, brutal use. The same skilled hands twisted plant fibers into the thick, heavy ropes needed to hoist scaffolding and lower massive stones into place, their tensile strength a matter of life and death for the workers below. And then there was the most fundamental need of all: food. An army of laborers consumes an army's worth of provisions. Women managed the colossal logistics of feeding thousands, milling grain for bread, brewing beer, preserving meat, and organizing the distribution of meals that kept the entire project moving. Without this vast, organized network of sustenance, the work would have ground to a halt in a matter of days. In some societies, however, women's roles were far more direct and authoritative. Among the Yoruba people in what is now Nigeria, the earlode was a powerful female title holder, a chief who represented the interests of all women and wielded significant economic and political influence. It is believed that women holding such titles could have been responsible for organizing and overseeing the construction of the massive, intricate earthworks and walls that protected great cities like Ife. Their leadership would have been crucial in mobilizing community labor and ensuring the defenses were built to specification. This was not merely supporting the work, it was directing it. The story of ancient construction is not just one of architects and masons, but of weavers, rope makers, cooks, and leaders. To see only the stones is to miss half the picture, the living, breathing human tapestry that wove strength into the walls. What other names and stories have been lost to time, their contributions silently cemented into the very foundations we marvel at today? These walls were not just shields, they were spring-loaded fists. Every parapet and tower was engineered as a launch platform for a storm of projectiles, turning the fortress into a single, cohesive siege-breaking machine. The most critical feature was the artillery platform itself. These were not simple walkways, but wide, flat areas of the battlements specifically reinforced with extra thick stone and deep foundations to absorb the violent recoil of massive weapons like ballistae and catapults. A ballista, essentially a giant crossbow that fired heavy iron-tipped bolts, would lurch backwards with every shot. Without a stable, unyielding base, the weapon would quickly shake itself and the wall apart. The platforms were often positioned at the corners of the fortress or at regular intervals along the curtain wall, providing overlapping fields of fire that left no approach safe. From these vantage points, engineers could calculate trajectories to pound enemy siege towers or clear the field of advancing infantry with terrifying precision. But the true genius was in the protection of the individual archer. Look closely at any surviving fortress wall and you will see them, the narrow, vertical slits known as embrasures or arrow loops. These were not just holes in the wall, they were masterpieces of defensive geometry. From the outside, the opening was just a thin slit, a difficult target for an enemy archer to hit. But on the inside, the stone was carved away in a funnel shape, creating a wide splay that gave the defender inside a surprisingly broad field of view and fire. A single archer could cover a vast swath of the battlefield while remaining almost entirely concealed behind feet of solid stone. Some embrasures were even designed with a horizontal cross slit at the bottom, allowing an archer to aim and shoot directly downward at the base of the wall, targeting sappers or soldiers trying to scale it. This design turned every archer into a ghost, a deadly, unseen marksman. The final logistical challenge was ammunition. How do you get massive stone balls, heavy jars of Greek fire, or bundles of arrows up to the battlements during the heat of a battle? The answer lay in a network of specialized hoists and pulleys built directly into the fortress structure. Small, sturdy cranes were installed in protected courtyards just below the wall walks. These were not the tall, swinging cranes of a construction site, but compact, powerful winches operated by a few men. They could lift casks of oil or baskets of rocks from the storage magazines below and swing them directly onto the rampart. Some fortresses featured internal shafts with counterweight systems, like a dumbwaiter, that could deliver a continuous supply of death from the heart of the fortress to its fighting teeth. This seamless integration of weapon, platform, and supply line meant a well-prepared fortress could sustain a devastating rate of fire for hours, its walls not just enduring an attack but actively delivering one. The stones themselves speak a language we are only beginning to decode. Beyond the grand arches and towering walls, the ancient builders left behind a silent, symbolic record, a cryptographic message etched into the very fabric of their creations. These are not the grand inscriptions of kings, but the personal signatures of the masons, the hidden marks of the individual hands that shaped eternity. Look closely at the quarried blocks of a medieval castle or an Egyptian temple, and you will find them small, chiseled symbols, a simple cross, a star, a stylized animal. These were stonemasons' marks, a practical system of ancient quality control. Each craftsman had his own unique symbol. When a block was finished and set in place, he would carve his mark into its face. This created a direct line of accountability. If a stone cracked or fit poorly, the overseer could trace it back to the individual responsible. This simple system ensured that every block met the exacting standards required to build a fortress that would last 1,000 years. But some of these stone codes seem to whisper of something far deeper than mere accounting. Could these symbols also be a form of protective magic or a way to pass down secret knowledge? In the labyrinthine corridors of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, the walls are a riot of carved stone, a library of symbols that has fueled speculation for centuries. Among the countless intricate patterns are carvings of maize and aloe vera, plants native to the Americas decades before Columbus set sail. Were these botanical codes left by builders with knowledge of a world unknown to Europe? Or do they represent something else entirely, a symbolic language tied to ancient spiritual beliefs? This idea of stone as a vessel for esoteric knowledge appears across cultures. In the massive fortress of Sigiriya in Sri Lanka, the mirror wall is covered in ancient graffiti, poems and messages left by visitors over a millennium ago. Yet some believe that hidden within these seemingly random inscriptions are older, more deliberate patterns, geometric alignments that correspond to celestial events or sacred ratios. The wall itself becomes a complex cipher, its true message visible only to those initiated in its meaning. The drive to encode meaning in stone may have sprung from a powerful and universal human need to speak to the future. In an age when parchment burned and empires fell, stone was the most permanent medium imaginable. By carving their knowledge, their beliefs, or even their warnings into the fortress walls, the builders were attempting a conversation across time. They were ensuring that even if their language was forgotten and their cities turned to dust, a part of their story would endure, locked in the silent, patient stone, waiting for a generation with the eyes to see and the mind to understand. What profound secrets might we unlock if we could finally learn to read the walls? That sharp turn at the gate was a death sentence in stone. Just beyond the main entrance of countless fortresses, from the Crusader castles of the Levant to the mighty walls of ancient Mesopotamia, visitors were forced to make an abrupt 90-degree turn. This was the bent axis entrance, a design of pure, calculated genius that transformed a simple doorway into an inescapable trap. It was never about convenience, it was about control. Imagine a squad of enemy soldiers having finally shattered the outer gate with their battering ram, surging forward in a triumphant, chaotic rush. Instead of a clear path into the city or courtyard, they are confronted by a solid wall of stone, forcing the entire mass of men to lurch violently to the left or right. In that single moment of confusion and bottleneck, their charge is completely broken. The momentum of their attack evaporates into a tangled, disorganized crowd crammed into a narrow, shadowy passage. This is where the defenders unleashed hell. From the high walls on three sides, archers and spearmen had a perfect, concentrated target. There was no need for precision. Every arrow and every thrown rock would find a mark in the packed, struggling mass below. The invaders, trapped in this stone coffin, could not raise their shields effectively to defend against attacks coming from above and from the sides simultaneously. Their large, heavy battering ram, the very tool that got them this far, was now a useless, immovable log in the cramped space, blocking their own retreat and adding to the chaos. This simple 90-degree bend neutralized the most feared weapons of the ancient battlefield. A cavalry charge, the ultimate shock weapon, was rendered utterly impotent. No horse could build up speed or maneuver in such a tight corridor, and a mounted knight became a slow, vulnerable target. Even the simple act of carrying a long, heavy ladder became a logistical nightmare, as the team of men carrying it would have to stop, pivot, and shuffle sideways to navigate the turn, all under a constant hail of death from above. The bent axis was more than a wall, it was a psychological masterstroke. It took the moment of an attacker's greatest expectation, the breakthrough, and twisted it into their greatest vulnerability. That dark, cramped turn became a symbol of certain doom, a final, clever trick played by builders who knew that the best way to stop an enemy was to make them stumble at the very threshold of victory. That 90-degree turn was a masterwork of defensive geometry, but the very substance of the walls themselves held an even deeper secret. Ancient builders were alchemists of the earth, transforming the local landscape into impenetrable armor. They did not simply use the nearest rock, they curated materials with a scientist's eye for their unique physical properties. In regions blessed with flint-hard limestone, they quarried the densest strata, knowing it would resist battering rams and shatter enemy tools. In volcanic lands, they sought out basalt, a stone forged in fire, prized for its incredible compressive strength and rough, unclimbable texture. They understood that the land itself offered a perfect, pre-made toolkit for defense. This philosophy reached its zenith with rammed earth, a technique perfected in ancient China. Builders would mix local soil with clay, gravel, and a small amount of lime or other binder. This mixture was then packed layer by layer into massive wooden forms. Teams of laborers wielding heavy rammers would pound the earth into a dense, homogeneous mass. When the forms were removed, what remained was a wall as hard as stone, with the color and texture of the surrounding landscape, making it blend in perfectly. These rammed earth walls were not just cheap imitations, they possessed a remarkable resilience, able to absorb the impact of earthquakes by flexing slightly without catastrophic failure. The Great Wall itself, in many of its earliest sections, was built using this brilliant, locally sourced technology. But this mastery of local materials sparks a controversial and revolutionary theory. For some of the world's most mystifying structures, like the precision-carved blocks of the Giza Plateau or the seamless megaliths at Puma Punku, a growing number of researchers propose something extraordinary: geopolymerization. This theory suggests that ancient builders did not always cut and haul every single stone. Instead, they may have created an artificial stone directly on site, a precursor to modern concrete. The process would have involved taking the local limestone, crushing it into a powder, and then mixing it with water and a special alkaline activator, something derived from plant ash or natron salt. This would create a thick, cement-like slurry that could be poured into wooden molds. Once set, this geopolymer stone would be chemically identical to natural limestone, but it would explain the impossible fits, the lack of tool marks, and the ability to form massive, complex blocks without the need for superhuman quarrying and transport. The evidence is tantalizing. Microscopic analysis of some stones reveals a consistency and air bubble pattern more common in cast materials than in naturally sedimentary rock. Were the pyramid builders not just master masons, but the world's first chemical engineers, crafting their own stone as easily as a potter shapes clay? This idea remains fiercely debated, challenging our very perception of ancient technology. Whether they used nature's gifts or invented their own, these builders demonstrated a profound intimacy with the very ground beneath their feet, turning simple dirt and stone into legacies of eternal strength. A fortress was a weapon that targeted the mind long before it ever engaged an army. Its architecture was a deliberate performance of power, a psychological assault designed to make an enemy's courage crumble before the first arrow was ever nocked. The sheer, overwhelming scale was the opening statement. An approaching soldier looking up at walls that scraped the sky was not just seeing stone, he was confronting his own insignificance. The message was brutally clear: you are small, and this place is eternal. This intimidation was carved in stone at the entrances, where gateways were often flanked by colossal statues of guardians, mythical beasts like dragons or lions, their stone jaws frozen in a perpetual snarl. These were not decorations, they were sentinels of fear. In Assyrian palaces, massive lamashu, winged bulls with human heads, stood watch. From the front, they appeared to stand calmly, but from the side, they were depicted striding forward, a clever artistic trick that made them seem as if they were moving to confront any who dared approach. They were the embodiment of the ruler's power, a promise that this place was protected by forces beyond the mortal realm. This architectural propaganda was calculated to signal the invincibility of the king or emperor who dwelled within. A fortress was not just a defensive structure, it was the physical manifestation of a ruler's authority, a permanent billboard declaring their divine right to rule and their absolute control over the land and its people. The towering heights, the impassable walls, the terrifying guardians all worked in concert to create a sense of futility in any would-be attacker. Why risk everything to assault a place that the gods themselves seemed to protect? The goal was to win the war without fighting a single battle, to turn ambition into despair with a single, imposing glance. How many campaigns were abandoned simply because the fortress looked too strong to ever fall? The mightiest fortress needed a whisper, not just a roar. Tucked away in an obscure corner of the wall, often hidden behind a curtain of ivy or disguised to look like a solid part of the stonework, was the postern gate. This small, unassuming door was the fortress's secret weapon, a crucial element of survival that balanced its overwhelming defensive strength with a vital dose of stealth and flexibility. While the main gates were designed for intimidation and withstanding a direct assault, the postern was built for silence and secrecy. Its location was known only to the highest-ranking officers and a select few guards, a piece of intelligence more valuable than any map of the treasure vaults. This humble doorway was the fortress's lifeline to the outside world during a prolonged siege. Under the cover of darkness, swift runners could slip out to gather intelligence on enemy troop movements. Messengers carrying desperate pleas for reinforcements could evade the besieging army's patrols, their survival hinging on this single, hidden passage. But its purpose was not purely defensive. The postern gate was also the launching point for devastating surprise attacks. A small, elite force of soldiers could gather silently in the courtyard, their armor muffled, waiting for the signal. The hidden door would swing inward just enough for them to file out, one by one, into the night. They would then fall upon the unsuspecting enemy camp from an unexpected direction, causing chaos and destroying siege engines before melting back into the fortress as quickly as they came. This psychological blow could be as damaging as the physical one, leaving the besiegers constantly paranoid, never knowing from which shadow an attack might emerge. Even the simple act of receiving supplies was transformed by this secret door. When a fortress was completely surrounded, sympathetic locals or allied agents could use pre-arranged signals to approach the camouflaged postern under darkness, delivering sacks of grain, crucial medical herbs, or news from the outside. The door's design was a masterpiece of concealment. Some were built into the base of a tower, hidden by the structure's own shadow. Others were placed near a flowing stream, the constant sound masking the noise of its opening and closing. The door itself might be faced with a thin layer of stone that matched the surrounding wall, or constructed to look like a solid, unmovable block. This tiny, forgotten door was the difference between a stagnant, trapped garrison and a dynamic, unpredictable defender, proving that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in being unseen, but in being able to see everything while remaining a ghost yourself. That secret postern gate ensured the garrison could strike back, but their true endurance was forged in the fortress's unseen veins. A clean fortress is a healthy fortress, and a healthy garrison can hold out for months against a starving, disease-ridden army outside its walls. Ancient builders understood this stark reality, engineering sophisticated drainage and sanitation systems that were as vital to defense as any rampart or tower. They waged a silent war against filth and stagnation, turning the entire stronghold into a self-cleaning organism. High on the battlements, you would find carefully carved stone gutters and lead downpipes designed to channel torrential rainwater off the walls with ruthless efficiency. This was not merely for convenience. By preventing water from pooling and seeping into the masonry, these systems stopped the destructive cycle of freezing and thawing that could crack the strongest stone over a single winter. They fought erosion at a microscopic level, preserving the structural integrity of the defenses season after season. But the true genius of this hydraulic engineering was found in the most private of spaces. Built into the thick outer walls were small, projecting chambers known as garderobes. These were the latrines of the fortress, simple stone seats with a hole that opened into a chute. Waste would drop down this shaft, often plunging directly into the fortress moat below or a deep, specially designed pit. While the thought is unpleasant to us in a time of siege, this was a strategic asset. A foul moat was a secondary line of defense, discouraging attackers from attempting to swim or wade across. More importantly, it kept the waste away from the living quarters, a fundamental key to preventing the outbreak of cholera, dysentery, and other waterborne diseases that could decimate a garrison far more effectively than any sword. This waste management was just one part of a much larger subterranean network. Beneath the courtyards and stone floors ran a labyrinth of underground drainage channels. These were not simple ditches, but carefully sloped stone tunnels, sometimes large enough for a person to crawl through for maintenance. They collected runoff from rooftops and courtyards, channeling it away from the foundations to prevent flooding and dampness. In some advanced fortresses, these channels would feed into a central cistern, filtering and storing grey water for non-drinking purposes like putting out fires or watering livestock. This multi-layered approach created a constant cycle of cleanliness and renewal. Rainwater was harvested or diverted, waste was isolated and expelled, and the living spaces remained dry and ventilated. During a prolonged siege, when an attacking army was often camped in its own squalor, the defenders inside, with their functioning latrines and dry quarters, enjoyed a monumental advantage in health and morale. The fortress was not just a shield against arrows, but a sanctuary against the invisible armies of decay and disease. How many sieges were ultimately won not by the strength of the walls, but by the purity of the water and the simple, life-saving function of a stone toilet? The most dangerous wall was the one that seemed to fail. Ancient builders were masters of deception, and their cruelest trick was the art of the false weakness. They understood an enemy's psychology, that an army would always seek the path of least resistance, so they gave them one. A section of the outer wall might be built to look slightly lower, its stones less perfectly fitted, or its surface conveniently scarred with what appeared to be old damage. To a besieging commander scanning the defenses, this spot would shine like a beacon, a fatal flaw promising a quicker, cheaper victory. It was a siren song carved in stone, and those who answered it marched directly into a slaughterhouse. Behind that tempting facade lay not a vulnerable courtyard, but a meticulously engineered death trap. Sometimes the false wall concealed a deep, spike-lined pit, camouflaged with a thin layer of wicker and earth that would collapse under the weight of the first assault ladder. Soldiers pushing forward in a dense pack would suddenly vanish into the earth, their comrades behind them stumbling into the same hidden chasm in the chaos. Other designs hid a collapse mechanism where pulling on the seemingly scalable stones would trigger a counterweight, causing a large section of the battlement above to swing down or a cascade of heavy rocks to pour onto the attackers crammed below. The most insidious designs funneled the enemy into a killing zone disguised as a breach. Imagine soldiers pouring through what they believed was a hard-won gap in the defenses, only to find themselves in a small, enclosed courtyard with no exit. The inner walls of this courtyard would be lined with multiple tiers of murder holes and arrow slits, all perfectly positioned to fire down into the trapped, panicking mass. The main gate would then slam shut behind them, sealing their fate. This was not a battle, it was an execution, a lesson taught in stone and blood. The false weakness was the ultimate psychological gambit, turning an attacker's own ambition and impatience into their executioner. How many armies met their end not at the strongest point of the fortress, but at the one that was deliberately built to fail? That secret knowledge was a treasure more closely guarded than any gold in the royal vaults. The ability to raise an impregnable fortress was not a skill for the masses, but a sacred science protected by secretive guilds and elite families of master builders. These men were the rock stars of the ancient world, their minds filled with geometric secrets and chemical formulas that could dictate the rise and fall of empires. Their power did not come from a sword, but from a set of plans known only to them. This was a world of oral tradition, where the most critical instructions were never written down, but whispered from master to apprentice over a lifetime. A single, misremembered ratio in a mortar recipe could mean the difference between a wall that stood for 1,000 years and one that crumbled in a generation. These guilds were like the intelligence agencies of construction, protecting their proprietary techniques with a code of silence that was unbreakable. They developed their own symbolic languages and hand signals to communicate on a busy work site without revealing their methods to the uninitiated laborers hauling stones. The precise rule for setting the keystone in an arch, the exact angle of batter that made a wall appear impossibly tall, the secret ingredient that made concrete self-heal, these were all locked away in the collective memory of the guild. They maintained their monopoly not through force but through irreplaceable expertise. A king might command an army, but only a master builder could give him a fortress to command it from. This system of knowledge transfer was a long and intimate journey. A boy might be apprenticed to a master at the age of 7, spending years performing the most menial tasks like mixing mud or carrying water. This was not just cheap labor, it was a test of character and dedication. Only after proving his loyalty and patience would the master begin to reveal the first, simplest secrets: how to properly dress a stone, how to check a level. The apprentice learned by doing and by watching, absorbing the master's intuitive understanding of weight, balance, and stress. The most profound truths were passed on not in a classroom, but on the scaffolding high above the world. The loss of such a guild was a cultural catastrophe. When the Roman Empire fell, the intricate network of building guilds that had maintained its infrastructure and military architecture dissolved. The precise recipe for their legendary self-healing seawater concrete vanished for centuries, a technological marvel that our modern engineers have only recently begun to decipher. The same tragedy unfolded in other corners of the world. where invading armies or devastating plagues could wipe out these living libraries of stonecraft in a single generation. The knowledge did not burn in a library fire, it died with the last master who held it in his mind. The silent, ruined fortresses that dot our landscapes are not just monuments to forgotten kings, they are tombstones for entire schools of thought, a permanent silence where there was once a whispered secret. A flash of light across the valley could save a kingdom. In an age before radio waves, ancient engineers harnessed the sun itself as a messenger, creating a network of light that connected distant fortresses in the blink of an eye. Their tools were deceptively simple, highly polished bronze or silver shields, sheets of obsidian glass, or even thin, translucent slices of mica strategically placed in watchtower windows. These were not mere decorations, they were the core components of an optical telegraph system of breathtaking speed and complexity. A sentry spotting enemy movements would not reach for a horn but for a reflector. By angling his shield against the sun, he could send a brilliant pinpoint of light flickering toward the next tower in the chain. This was not random flashing. The signals followed a precise code. A single, sustained flash might mean cavalry spotted. 2 quick flashes could signal infantry on the move. A series of rapid pulses might be a desperate call for reinforcements. The patterns were a language of light, a vocabulary of crisis and command that could leap across 50 miles in less than a minute, a distance that would take a horseman half a day to cover. The entire defensive network would be alerted and mobilizing before the invading army had even finished setting up its first camp. The genius of this system lay in its simplicity and its secrecy. To an enemy soldier on the ground, these flashes were just annoying glints, easily mistaken for the sun reflecting off a piece of armor or a distant stream. They had no idea they were witnessing the entire defense of a region coordinating in real time right above their heads. The Romans perfected this with a relay system along their frontiers, where specularii, soldiers specially trained in signaling, manned towers at precise intervals to ensure the message never died. But perhaps the most sophisticated use was by the Greeks, who legend says used polished shields to relay the news of the fall of Troy all the way to Mycenae, a message of victory traveling at the speed of light. This technology turned a string of isolated stone towers into a single, conscious entity with a nervous system of reflected sunlight, proving that the most powerful weapon a fortress possessed was not its walls but the speed with which it could speak. A raging river could become a moat that never ran dry, and a sheer cliff face was a wall that never crumbled. The most brilliant builders knew that fighting nature was a fool's errand, so they became its greatest partner. This philosophy of integrating natural defenses transformed the very definition of a fortress, turning the landscape itself into an active, impassable guardian. Instead of viewing a swamp as a problem to be drained, they saw it as a free, self-replenishing barrier that would swallow armies whole. A dense, tangled forest was not an obstacle to be cleared, but a sprawling, living maze that would confuse and delay any invading force for days. The labor and materials saved by incorporating these features were incalculable, allowing builders to concentrate their resources on reinforcing the few man-made sections that truly needed it. The result was a defensive system that was both economically brilliant and terrifyingly effective. Edinburgh Castle stands as a perfect testament to this strategy. It was not built upon a convenient hill, but on the core of an extinct volcano, a brutal volcanic plug of basalt that had been scoured by glaciers into a near-vertical cliff on 3 sides. No siege tower could be rolled against it, no battering ram could reach its gates, and any attempt to scale its slick, rocky faces would be a suicide mission. The builders only needed to fortify the one gentle approach, the tail of the ridge, turning a naturally formidable position into an utterly unassailable one. This same principle echoed across the globe. In Japan, feudal lords positioned their castles on steep mountainsides, using the rugged terrain to force attackers into narrow, winding paths that were easily defended. In the marshlands of Europe, fortresses were built on artificial islands, their foundations protected by miles of sucking mud and murky water that hid submerged stakes and trapped heavy equipment. An enemy army burdened with armor and supplies would find itself sinking into a cold, watery grave before it ever saw a stone wall. Why build a wall 100 feet high when you could simply use a mountain that was 1,000? This deep, symbiotic relationship with the environment reveals a wisdom we have often forgotten in our age of steel and concrete. The ancient builders did not seek to dominate the land, but to listen to it, to understand its inherent strengths and weave their ambitions into its existing fabric. The greatest fortress was not the one that stood against nature, but the one that stood with it, a seamless fusion of human ingenuity and the earth's raw, enduring power. Even the most perfect plan could shatter against reality. Across the ancient world, the skeletons of fortresses hold a silent testimony to moments of crisis and adaptation, where construction suddenly swerved from its original design. These abandoned blueprints are not failures of vision, but records of brilliant, on-the-fly problem-solving. At the mighty Crusader castle of Crac des Chevaliers, archaeologists found something strange. The initial, symmetrical plan for the inner ward was abruptly altered. A massive, curved defensive wall was slammed right through the space intended for a grand hall. Why would the builders compromise their own beautiful, orderly design? The answer likely came on the wind, carrying news of a terrifying new siege weapon, the counterweight trebuchet. This machine could hurl massive stones in a high arc over the outer walls. The builders, realizing their inner sanctum was now vulnerable, sacrificed elegance for survival, throwing up an emergency barrier to protect against this new technological threat. Sometimes the change was driven by something less tangible than a new weapon. An oracle or a priest might interpret an omen, a lightning strike or an eclipse as a divine warning. The message could be that the gods were displeased with the alignment of a gate or the placement of a tower. Fearing celestial wrath more than any human army, the builders would immediately change course, adding a shrine where a barracks was meant to be or sealing a gateway that was deemed spiritually unlucky. The most common reason for a sudden shift, however, was brutally practical, a simple lack of resources. A quarry might run out of the finest quality stone, forcing engineers to use smaller, rougher blocks for the upper levels. A sudden drought could decimate the labor force with disease, or a war might divert funding and materials to more immediate needs. The builders had to adapt, creating a weaker section of wall but reinforcing it with an extra tower, or narrowing a planned gateway to save on timber and metalwork. These visible changes in the stone are like a paused conversation across centuries. They show us that ancient engineering was not a rigid, preordained script, but a living, breathing process of trial and error. Each deviation from the plan is a snapshot of a dilemma faced and a decision made under pressure. What appears to be a mistake to our modern eyes was often their most ingenious solution. A permanent record of a crisis met and overcome by the flexible minds of the master builders. A fortress was never a finished idea, but a story written and rewritten in stone by generations of new hands. The greatest strongholds were not the work of a single brilliant mind, but a collaborative project across centuries, a melting pot of defensive genius where conquerors became contributors. Look closely at the ancient citadel of Aleppo, and you are not seeing one fortress but many. Its foundations were laid by the Hittites over 3,000 years ago. Then came the Romans, who added their characteristically robust walls and straight, orderly gates. The Byzantines followed, reinforcing the defenses for their own wars. Finally, Islamic rulers left the most visible mark with towering entrance gates and a magnificent mosque that crowned the summit. Each culture did not simply erase the work of its predecessors. It built directly upon it, learning from the existing structure and adding its own innovations. This created an architectural palimpsest, a manuscript where old writing shows through beneath the new, telling a deeper story of shared knowledge. This was not mere reuse, it was a form of technological osmosis. When one civilization conquered another, they captured more than land and treasure, they captured blueprints. A Roman engineer examining a Hittite wall would learn something about load-bearing angles. An Islamic architect studying a Byzantine gatehouse would understand new principles of deflection and crowd control. The secrets of mortar, acoustics, and water management were not lost in these transitions. They were absorbed, studied, and refined. The fortress became a living library of military engineering, its very walls a curriculum for the next wave of builders. This cross-cultural exchange is visible across the globe. In Spain, the stunning Alhambra Palace fortress showcases Islamic architectural mastery, with its intricate geometric patterns and ingenious water channels. Yet, after the Christian Reconquista, new structures were added, blending Gothic and Renaissance styles with the existing Islamic core without destroying it. The new rulers recognized the brilliance of what was already there, choosing to adapt and enhance rather than demolish. Why start from scratch when you can stand on the shoulders of giants? This continuous cycle of construction and modification reveals a profound truth about human conflict and connection. Even in war, there was a silent respect for good engineering. A well-built wall was a value that transcended language, religion, and empire. The multicultural fortress stands as a monument not to a single culture's triumph, but to the enduring, collaborative genius of survival itself. The stars were their ultimate blueprint. While we have seen how fortresses aligned with the sun, the ancients also anchored their walls to the fixed points of the night sky, using constellations as celestial cornerstones for perfect orientation. This was not merely symbolic, it was a matter of practical precision. Before the invention of the magnetic compass, the true north provided by the spin of the Earth was the only unchangeable reference. By carefully observing the slow, predictable wheel of the stars around the pole, a master builder could establish a true north-south or east-west axis with an accuracy that mere terrestrial surveying could rarely achieve. The entire fortress, from its longest curtain wall to its most intimate inner chamber, could then be laid out in perfect harmony with the cosmos. This celestial alignment served multiple, interconnected purposes. In cultures that worshipped a sun god, the main gate might be oriented to catch the first rays of dawn on the deity's feast day, transforming the entrance into a blazing portal of divine favor. For societies governed by agricultural cycles, the heliacal rising of a specific star, its first appearance in the pre-dawn sky after a period of invisibility, could signal the exact day to begin planting or harvesting. A fortress whose gates opened to mark this event became the literal and spiritual center of the community's survival. The military advantage was equally profound. Knowing that a certain star would be directly over a specific watchtower on the first day of autumn gave commanders a reliable, unchangeable calendar. They could predict the changing weather, plan campaigns around harvest times to feed their troops, and coordinate movements with distant allies using the shared universal clock of the heavens. How did they achieve such precision? The tools were elegant in their simplicity. A long, water-filled trench could serve as a perfect level horizon line for measuring the altitude of stars. A simple sighting rod, known as a gnomon, cast shadows by day and could be used to track star transits by night. More sophisticated sites feature carved stone channels or aligned monoliths that functioned as permanent astronomical instruments. The Nubians in ancient Sudan, for instance, built small, window-like openings in their fortress walls that framed the rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. When the brilliant light of Sirius appeared centered in that stone window, it signaled the imminent arrival of the annual Nile flood, the lifeblood of their civilization. The fortress was not just a military outpost, but an observatory that safeguarded the very rhythm of life. This deep celestial connection meant the fortress was more than a building. It was a reflection of the universal order, an earthly mirror of the starry sky above, ensuring its place in the cosmos was as secure as its footing on the ground. A fortress silhouette against the sky was a message written in geometry. The star-shaped bastion with its sharp, projecting points was not merely an artistic choice, it was a direct response to the age of cannon warfare. Each pointed bastion was positioned to provide a clear line of fire along the neighboring wall, eliminating the deadly blind spots that plagued older, square designs. An attacker approaching any side of the fortress would find themselves exposed to a devastating crossfire from multiple angles, their advance measured in a storm of iron and fire. Yet this brutal efficiency was often layered with a deeper, symbolic language. A circular fort like the ancient Brocks of Scotland presented an unbroken curve to the world. It had no vulnerable corners for siege engines to target, and its shape distributed stress evenly, making it remarkably resilient. But the circle also symbolized perfection, eternity, and the divine order of the cosmos, a powerful statement of a kingdom's unending and divinely sanctioned rule. The square fortress, a common form from Rome to ancient China, was a declaration of human order imposed upon a chaotic world. Its four walls often aligned with the four cardinal directions, mirroring the perceived structure of the universe itself. This was not just a military compound, it was a microcosm of the empire, a place where earthly power reflected celestial harmony. The ruler at its center became the axis mundi, the pivot around which the entire world turned. Some fortress shapes were even more explicit in their symbolism. The layout of a city fortress might be designed to mimic a sacred animal, like a turtle for longevity and protection, or a dragon for power and vigilance. In other cases, the entire ground plan could be a cosmological diagram, a mandala representing the layers of heaven and earth, with the central keep or temple symbolizing the sacred mountain at the center of creation. To enter such a place was not just to approach a military target, it was to walk into a living map of the builder's spiritual beliefs, where every wall and gate was imbued with meaning that reinforced the authority of those within. The shape was both a shield and a sermon, a physical form that protected the body while proclaiming the soul of the civilization it represented. What hidden beliefs are still encoded in the foundations beneath our feet? Their names are whispers against the thunder of their creations. While thousands of laborers and masons remain forever anonymous, history has preserved a precious few, names like Imhotep and Sinan, who remind us that these stone titans began as a spark in a single brilliant mind. These were not just engineers, they were total architects of power, men whose personal vision and relentless innovation permanently redefined what was possible. Imhotep, the chancellor to the pharaoh Djoser in ancient Egypt, is perhaps the first recorded architect in history. He did not just build a bigger tomb, he conceived of something entirely new, the step pyramid at Saqqara. This was not merely a fortress for the dead, but a monumental complex designed to project the pharaoh's eternal and unassailable authority. Imhotep's genius was to stack mastaba tombs, creating a stairway to the heavens that was also a statement of supreme earthly power. His name became so revered that he was later deified as a god of wisdom and medicine, a testament to the awe his intellect inspired. Centuries later and a world away, Mimar Sinan, the chief architect for the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent and his successors, left a legacy that shaped the skyline of an empire. While he is famed for mosques like the Suleymaniye, his military architecture was equally revolutionary. He designed fortress walls that were not just thick, but intelligently shaped to deflect cannonballs, and he integrated complex water systems that ensured his garrisons could withstand any siege. Sinan's personal journey was remarkable. He was conscripted into the Ottoman army as a young man through the Devshirme system, and his innate talent for engineering was recognized and nurtured on military campaigns. He learned his craft by building bridges and fortifications for the army, a practical education that informed his entire career. His work is a masterclass in blending overwhelming scale with breathtaking elegance, proving that defensive strength and sublime beauty were not opposites but two sides of the same coin. What drove these individuals? Was it a desire for immortal fame, unwavering loyalty to their ruler, or a simple, burning need to solve the grandest puzzles of stone and space? They were part artist, part general, and part scientist, synthesizing knowledge from astronomy, mathematics, and hydraulics into a single, cohesive vision. They fought against the limitations of their time, not with weapons, but with geometry and gravity, bending the very laws of nature to their will. To know their names is to reclaim a piece of our shared human story. It transforms a silent ruin from a mere structure into a testament of personal genius, a permanent signature left by a mind that dared to think on a scale meant for the gods. The final, enduring secret is that the greatest fortresses were not just built of stone, but of imagination, and every one of them began with a single, unforgettable thought. And there you have it, 35 secrets that peel back the layers of time, revealing the ancient fortress builders not as primitive laborers, but as brilliant engineers, cunning strategists, and even mystics who spoke the language of the earth and the stars. These silent stones hold epic stories of innovation, survival, and a deep, intuitive understanding of the world that we are still painstakingly unraveling today. From self-healing concrete and whispering walls to psychological deceptions and celestial alignments, each secret is a testament to a forgotten age of genius. So we turn the final question over to you. Which of these incredible secrets amazed you the most? Was it the animal collaborators, the geopolymer stone, or the terrifying false weaknesses? And do you know of any other mysterious building techniques lost to history? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into the minds of the master builders, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you do not miss our next historical